Coming up, a possible quarterback problem in Alabama and a possible quarterback solution at LSU. It's all on the way next as a part of SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We are glad you're with us, and first of all, congratulations to you on an outstanding debut for Roll Tide Daily. If you're an Alabama fan, you're going to want to check that out each and every day on the specific SEC Country Alabama video channels. But a great conversation got started today.
Yeah, it definitely was a lot of fun. We covered some same topics that we're about to go over on Tua Tagovailoa. So I'm interested to hear where you're coming from the point of view after I just got the Bama out.
Well, let's start with this then. Item number one on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Some controversial statements from Tua Tagovailoa going back to last week when Tua speaks in Hawaii at his, I guess, like a middle school. He's like, giving one of those rah-rah speeches to some middle school students. But in the midst of this motivational speech, I think maybe a touch of realism in terms of the way that Tua felt, but the quarterback situation in Alabama in 2017. Here is what Tua said, as recorded by Hawaii News Now. Even throughout my football season, I wasn't the starter. I wanted to leave the school. So I told myself, if I didn't play in the last game, which was the national championship game, I would transfer out. If I gave in, I don't think I would have seen the end blessing of where I am now. So Tua, in the midst of trying to do a motivational speech here, sort of touches on what, Lane Kiffin addressed this, by the way, a couple of months ago, that Tua Tagovailoa was going to transfer had he not played the national championship game. Those words spoken in Hawaii reverberate all the way here into SEC country.
Yes, they do.
What's your initial reaction when you hear that?
My initial reaction was this. I think that Tua got caught up in the moment, right? He wanted to give this special speech to these elementary school kids, and I don't think that he really understood how far those words were going to travel. I think that I've tried to give speeches like this before, and it's tough. Man, listen, kid's 19. He's probably never given a speech like this before. Doesn't talk to the media much. He's trying to give a positive message of making sure you stick things out. And the best way you can do that is say, listen, I didn't want to stick it out at first. I had to stick around and make sure I got everything. And then the focus comes down on him. You can feel the claws start to grab as that starts to release. And obviously, he had to recant some of the comments.
And we'll hear from him on that in a moment. Stephanie Span, though, in our Facebook comment section says this, the quote I just read from Tua Tagovailoa, is more of a message of not quitting than I'm actually transferring, in my opinion. And Stephanie, I understand where you're coming from on that. But the only problem with that, as I said, is he explicitly said he was going to transfer in the quote that I just read, and it was Lane Kiffin. As I said, we played this audio here on SEC Country Live a few months ago. Apparently, whatever message that Tua gave to those Hawaii middle school students, he'd also given to Lane Kiffin as well. And you don't tell anything to Lane Kiffin that you want to keep a secret, because Kiffin goes on a national radio interview and essentially says everything that Tua Tagovailoa had told him. So the one thing that seems undeniable to me is that transferring was on Tua Tagovailoa's mind.
I have no problem with that. I have no problem with sitting here and saying that this is a kid that definitely thought about transfer. Listen, I think anybody that comes from Honolulu or wherever he's from in Hawaii and comes to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, thinks about transferring, right? Thinks about leaving at some point. But I don't know if I've ever seen a recruit whose family and whose personal life has been as all in headed to Alabama as Tua Tagovailoa. So I think that his words, I think he wanted him to have some depth, right? I think he wanted to go at it and say, boy, this is where I was at. I was asking my dad about Southern California. I was asking about all these other things because he wanted to hammer the message home. To me, I don't think there was ever a risk of Tua leaving. I think that Nick Saban would have stopped that dead in its tracks. I think that Nick Saban would have done whatever he had to do to keep him on campus. I think that Tua just wanted the message to come out clear.
All right, well, let me come back to that in a moment here because, as you said, Tua Tagovailoa has tried to clarify his remarks. CBS 42 in Birmingham had a reporter in Hawaii with Tua as he's making the rounds here across the state here. The reporter's name is
Simone Eli.
Simone Eli. Simone's there with Tua in Hawaii. She asks him, all right, what do you mean by all this? And Tua did his best to explain. Here is Tua from CBS 42 in Birmingham.
I think if you're a collegiate athlete, you're most definitely competitive. You're going to feel like you want to play, and if your opportunity's not given, sometimes you make emotional decisions. What I meant was when you feel like you want to kind of quit or if you want to give in, I think the more you kind of put your head in the ground, in the dirt, and you keep working and pushing, trying to push through it, I think that's when you start to see the better of the end result. I kind of got the wrong end when I seen it on ESPN. You know, I think they most definitely took it out of context, saying if I didn't play, you know, I would have left and whatnot. I think sometimes if you don't stick it in, like what I said, you know, if you don't stick it in, if you just keep giving up, you won't see the end result in what God has prepared, you know, which is the blessing, you know, and I don't think I would have experienced it if I left.
Greg Laughlin on the Facebook comment section says, y'all are way too involved in the minutia of these kids' lives. He was talking to kids in a middle school. This is reportable. Y'all could use some growing up. Here's the problem. The intent for Tua may have been to motivate some middle schoolers, but within that sort of stated intent, there's some truth that sort of seeps through here. And the truth is that Tua Tagovailoa was considering transferring. And what you can't help but wonder is, much like Avarian Hurts, whose dad spoke, or Jalen Hurts' dad, Avarian Hurts, who spoke to Bleacher Report a couple of months ago, the timing of those words saying that, hey, if Jalen's not the starting quarterback, he's going to become the biggest free agent in college football history. That timing from Hurts' dad seemed intended to put a thumb on the scales of maybe choosing Jalen Hurts as the starting quarterback. Once again here, you've got timing at the issue for Alabama. Does Tua let this slip out in Hawaii, speaking to these middle school students, as a way of reminding Nick Saban of, hey, I threatened to transfer. I thought about transferring last year. If you let Jalen Hurts play more than me or at the start of this season instead of me, I'm going to start thinking about transferring again. It feels like timing is the issue here for Tua Tagovailoa. And for me, this feels like another act of manipulation on the part of an Alabama quarterback to try to balance the scales in his favor in terms of winning the starting job.
I just think we're reading too far into it. You know, I think that they probably asked Tua, hey, boy, when can we get you back to Hawaii? You know, we got to get you back. And he thought, well, you know, there's an interim right between the end of the spring semester and summer school. I can get back there for a week. Right, I can come back to Hawaii. It's going to be a long flight. I need a little bit of a layover. I need a week to do this. That's the only 3 weeks I have off. And so Tua flies back. There's the Tua Tagovailoa parade. He's dancing. He's got luau's on. He's speaking to elementary school kids. And I think he was speaking from the heart. If you understand and look at what this kid's message was, he's a teenager. He's trying to talk to elementary school kids. He's trying to find his way. He's trying to find the right words to say to make sure these kids stay the path. I don't think it was calculated. I don't think he had a message for Nick Saban. I don't think he had a message for Jalen Hurts. I think he wanted just the people to make sure to understand and stick things through.
Joshua Ryan Fought on Facebook also says, this is so dumb. He was speaking to a middle school class, telling them about how he almost gave up, took the easy way out, but stuck with it. It's better for it. Once again, here's the problem, though. You got John Talty, reporter for AL.com, Chris Kirshner, who's our colleague here at SEC Country. When these words from Tua Tagovailoa came out, they both referenced the commitment of Talia Tagovailoa to his brother, saying that this was made on Twitter. Both these reporters sort of alluded to the fact that the younger Talia Tagovailoa's commitment coming out when it does was also an attempt to manipulate this quarterback job in favor of Tua, saying it was essentially 2-on-1. Two Tagovailoa quarterback brothers in comparison to Jalen Hurts. The insinuation is if you choose someone other than Tua, you miss out on two quarterbacks here. So this is not the only time that the Tagovailoa family has been accused of trying to manipulate this quarterback battle for Alabama.
Yeah, I think the same goes for both sides, right? Avarian Hurts' words were very calculated. Like right before the spring game, that's when you kind of let this out. Talia then kind of commits at the spring game during A-Day, and everybody wants to talk about, you know, this family against that family. I understand that, and I'm not saying that wasn't what Talia Tagovailoa and his family had in mind. I think the fact that they moved to Birmingham, they would love Talia to be able to play at Alabama. They want to make sure Tua's got all the options in front of him. But I don't think this was a case of that. I think that these are isolated incidents. I think that Tua went over to Hawaii, got caught off guard, kind of speaking to some elementary school kids, and it's like he's come out since then. He said, listen, it was taken out of context. Now, the taken out of context thing for me when it comes to Tua, I'm going to let that slide too, because those were your words. They weren't taken out of context.
What he means is he wishes he didn't say.
Exactly.
But he did.
What he means is saying, I went a little bit too deep. And I've done this before. Listen, I'm sure you've done this too. You're 19 years old. You're speaking to these kids. You're trying to hammer the message home. You say something you probably... The crazy thing is that nowadays, this is an issue. You know, 15 years ago, there's probably not a camera. There's cell phones everywhere now. Everything's getting picked up. And listen, he's got to choose his words more carefully. I think it'll be a lesson for him.
Yeah, listen, I mean, Dietrich Frazier in the YouTube comment section says, I agree with BA. Tua let his true feelings slip out. And then that's the issue here. Obviously, Tua's not a guy that's spoken to the media before. He's not allowed to do that as a freshman in Alabama. This is one of the reasons why I think that Nick Saban probably does try to keep a tight lip on all this kind of stuff. And for, all the Alabama fans and really all of our comment sections, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, everything else, crying fake news about all of this, ask yourself a question. Is Nick Saban happy about this right now? Was he happy when Averian Hurts' dad spoke to Bleacher Report? Is he happy when Tua Tagovailoa says these kinds of things in the speech? You want to say, well, this is just the media trying to stir up controversy and trying to stir up trouble. What do you think Nick Saban says about this? If what y'all are saying is true, then Saban's not worried about the fake news of the media, to use the phrase that I've seen in the comment section here more than once. I can promise you this, Saban's not happy with the outside influences and outside voices speaking about the Alabama quarterback situation. In this respect, Tua Tagovailoa has sort of overstepped his bounds in this regard.
Yeah, this is exactly why Nick Saban doesn't like freshmen talking to the media, right? I mean, this is why he tries to keep a lid on it. This is why you try to get a year into the program. This is why you go through media training at Alabama before you're allowed to speak, because you have to understand that your words are going to carry weight, especially Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, you watch that video. He's hugging his dad on the sideline for the national championship game. He's talking to Nick Saban. He's talking to all these people. He's telling a story of when Nick Saban talked to them at halftime saying, which I thought was kind of a crazy insight, saying, hey, you guys are going to rotate in the second half. That's what Nick Saban told him at halftime. You and Jalen are going to rotate after halftime. But I just think this is a case where this story has just kind of outrun him to where he can't kind of wrangle it back in. And I think that Nick Saban, you're probably right. I mean, to your point, I don't think Nick Saban's very happy.
And final point on this, the idea that it's just some big misspeak and taken out of context. Lane Kiffin quoted Tua Tagovailoa is essentially saying the same thing to him. So if this is being taken out of context, it's been taken out of context by more than one person, more than one time. This is something that Tua has apparently said repeatedly, so much so that Lane Kiffin had already put it out there in the media. We'll come back to Tua Tagovailoa later in the show, including having more of your comments coming up. For now, though, let's do item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And big news for LSU. As reported over the weekend, the former Ohio State quarterback Joe Burrow has made his decision to transfer to LSU. We'll show you here Tom Groshen, the reporter, saying that he has picked LSU according to a highly placed UC source. He had narrowed it to LSU and the Cincinnati Bearcats. Of course, LSU's now made it official. Joe Burrow is a part of the LSU roster and will compete for that starting quarterback job this summer. Why is this a need for LSU? Why is Burrow in the fold? Well, in the aftermath of the LSU spring game, one in which Justin McMillan probably outperformed Lowell Narcisse and Miles Brennan, Ed Orgeron really explained why, and other quarterbacks entering the fray, saying, hey, listen, it's been up and down for all three of these guys all spring. Here's Orgeron on that.
I think you've all seen tonight what I've been telling you about the quarterbacks. Sometimes they're doing well, sometimes they're not. I thought Justin McMillan tonight had a good game. I thought he extended plays with his feet. When he was in, he moved the football when him and Clyde were back there. I thought that the offense was moving the football down the field.
So that's Ed Orgeron saying, listen, it's been up and down for all three of these guys all spring. Justin McMillan being the quarterback that played the best of the spring, it was probably a slight upset. None of these three guys had apparently distinguished themselves enough during the spring, so therefore the door is open then for somebody else, and that's really why Joe Burrow's on his way in.
No,
right?
It really is, and I think that we can read into the words that Ed Orgeron has been saying, for the last couple of months about the quarterback being in the room. The bottom line is this: there's all kinds of insight we can add to this. What does this do about recruiting? What does it say that they've had 2 Big Ten transfer quarterbacks in a row? Is Joe Burrow handed this job as soon as he steps on campus? The bottom line is this: that quarterback room and that football team as a whole just got better. And I think that's the bottom line to look at this here. LSU just got better as a football team. They got more talented. They have a quarterback who you really feel like can distribute the ball. I don't think they're going to hand him the job, but I would say he's A1 if he's a guy who left Ohio State and Ed Orgeron has obviously told him, hey, listen, we need you down here in Baton Rouge.
Well, you used the word recruiting. I mean, here's the thing. LSU needed a recruiting win, and that's what Joe Burrow is. Even if Burrow does not go on to be a great quarterback for LSU, this is an example of Ed Orgeron, his brand new offensive coordinator Steve Ensminger, winning a recruiting battle here, going head-to-head and bringing somebody in. That's something that LSU just had not done enough of. You go back to the class of 2018, whether it was the turmoil of Matt Canada or whatever, there were quarterback misses there. You didn't get Justin Rogers. You lost him to a TCU. This is an example of multiple schools wanting a quarterback, and this time that quarterback chose LSU. So no matter what happens to Burrow after all of this is an example of a recruiting win for LSU, which is something that the Tigers needed.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And they needed a quarterback, and they needed momentum, and they needed a guy who could work Steve Ensminger's new offense. And I'm not saying these other guys aren't going to have any ability to do that. But this is not just a grad transfer, too. Remember, this is a 2-year grad transfer, a guy that is an incredible quarterback, a guy that has proven that at Ohio State. So I can't help but lump this into the category of this is huge for LSU. I mean, I really can't. I've asked questions. I said that they've had too many holes at LSU for me to think they're going to be an incredible football team this year. I think they've answered one of them. I think that Joe Burrow has a lot to learn. I don't think it's plug and play the way we kind of thought it was at LSU. But I think he'll get up to speed pretty quickly.
Judah Alexander says Joe Burrow gives LSU hope, nothing more, nothing less. I think hope can be a good thing here. I sort of agree with Judah on that. Morgan Recton, who's a Florida fan, we thought the Gators might get involved in Burrow. They never really did. He says about Burrow going to LSU, this is on YouTube, Burrow's already saying he's going somewhere to play. Coach O must have told him he's most likely the starter. I don't know if a promise like that was given, but this idea that it's going to be a 4-way equal competition between 4 quarterbacks in a brief window of time to get ready for the season, especially with a big-time opponent like Miami on the doorstep here, you can't evaluate 4 quarterbacks evenly. Somebody has been disqualified here. Now, Orgeron's not going to tell us who it is, but you can't evaluate 4 quarterbacks. I'm not even sure you can evaluate 3 in a brief window of time to make somebody your starter here. This has got to be a Burrow versus somebody else, an A-B choice. It can't be A, B, C, or D. It's just too many quarterbacks to evaluate.
I'll go one step farther than you are right now, and I'm going to say all 4 of them won't even be on the roster by the time fall camp gets here. I think there's too much unrest, right? There's too much muddying in the waters to think that all 4 of these quarterbacks are going to be battling for LSU's starting job. I just don't think it's possible. Now, I think if Ed Orgeron can pull that off, then kudos to him. But I think there's going to be a quarterback leave this room, if not 2 of them, by the time fall camp comes around, because the writing's on the wall. Listen, if you're recruiting Joe Burrow that hard out of Ohio State, then they probably don't think you're starting quality right now down in Baton Rouge.
Shannon Burgess, an LSU fan on YouTube, says, BA, the performances for the quarterbacks in that spring game was only after 35% of the offense had been implemented for the spring game, which makes Shannon sound like some of the other LSU fans who watch our show every day that seems to have preferred one of the 3 quarterbacks currently on the roster more so than Joe Burrow here. And I don't get where that comes from. I would have thought that LSU getting Burrow would be universally greeted as good news on the part of LSU fans, but in our comment section, that's not necessarily the word that you get.
Yeah, and Cliff Nelson's over here telling people to kick rocks already. I mean, Judah Alexander says McMillan will be the one to leave. He's in his later years, and I tend to agree. I think McMillan's already graduated. I think that he has an opportunity to play right away wherever he lands. I just think that this is something that LSU had to do. I think there's so many ways we could have knocked Orgeron for how this went down, for what he said, for having these 3 quarterbacks on the roster, for having them battle it out and then cutting it off before the fall gets there. But it's like I said to start the topic off. This is a good thing for LSU no matter how you slice it. They got better as a team.
I like what Jeremy Birmingham, who used to be our colleague here at Atlanta10.com, covered Ohio State for a long time, what he said when Burrow transferred. He called him Joe Burrow on Twitter, except he spelled it J-E-A-U-X, Burrow with the E-A-U-X there at the end, and maybe pretty soon LSU fans will greet him just as warmly here. I think this is good news for LSU and for the teams to have to play LSU. I think this makes a much more significant challenge. Let's move on to item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And recently, Auburn coach Gus Malzahn went on 3-Man Front radio show on WJOX, a very good sports radio station in Birmingham that covers college football. And Malzahn expressed some frustration about the current state of the Auburn rivalry games. Right now, Auburn's in a bit of a pattern here where it hosts both Georgia and Alabama in the same year, has to go on the road to both programs in opposite years, and that is a change that Gus Malzahn would like to see made, where you don't do both of those in the same year. Here's what he told WJOX about that. Here's Gus Malzahn.
I think the big thing is having them staggered, one at home and one away would probably be the best for those 2 at the end. Last year was 2 at home, this year it's 2 away. And look back in 2010, we played Georgia at home, we played Alabama away, and that would be my wish.
So that's Malzahn saying, hey, how about a change the scheduling for Auburn here? We should point out that one of the reasons why Auburn's in what it is now is because going back to the addition of Missouri and Texas A&M to the SEC back in 2012, the Georgia-Auburn rivalry was actually changed. Georgia went to Auburn 2 years in a row to accommodate the scheduling needs there, and it's been different ever since. Is this whining on the part of Malzahn, or is this pointing out a reasonable change you'd like to see made?
You know me, I hate the flavor of the week comments. Like, I hate, when people come out and say, boy, this team's really good now, that team really. But I understand where he's coming from.
Yeah.
I really do. I think it's hard not to look at what that schedule lines up because, listen, there was a point where I was in school, and I can't remember what year it is, but there was a point where that schedule was the same for Alabama where LSU backed up to Auburn. You know what I mean? Where LSU was like 2 weeks separated from Auburn with kind of a down week in between. So I understand what he's saying. That's tough. I think we're moving, though, to a time in which, and I've said it on the show a million times, a 9-game conference schedule makes that a lot harder to do. I think that you're going to have a harder time kind of separating things. Now, do I wish that Bama looking at it or any team that you guys probably root for had like a bye week between? Absolutely. I just don't want to call this Malzahn whining because I do think he has an actual gripe.
I think he has an actual gripe too, and you talk about flavor of the month scheduling. This is actually something that the negativity here from Auburn's perspective is sort of the flavor of the month. For a long time, the Georgia-Auburn game was for Auburn an even numbered year home game, an odd numbered year road game. It was only since 2012 this has been changed, and even though Georgia's better now than Georgia used to be, Georgia and Alabama have always been Auburn's two biggest rivals. It does seem somewhat fair not to be asked to play on the road against both those teams in the same year, although as Malzahn pointed out in this interview, you also benefit from having them both at home, but that's almost like too much of a blessing for just 1 year.
I think it was too much of a blessing last year. I mean, really, when you have both those at home, it's like, boy, we take down 2 number 1 teams in a row at home, and then you go on the road to the SEC championship game and kind of fall flat, and obviously a lot of that had to do with injuries. So it is tough. I just think that when you look at really and break it down the schedule, I think Malzahn has a right to say what he said.
Trent Burke on Facebook says, Gus Bus already crying. This, to me, is not in that category of Pat Dye last year saying that Auburn should get into the SEC East to avoid Alabama or some of those kinds of things we heard. This is just sort of a reasonable claim. And by the way, as a fan of one of the schools that's come in this conversation, it also benefit Georgia to flip-flop this as well because Georgia's schedule is somewhat imbalanced. A lot of rivalry games at home during even-numbered years. Georgia could use a consistently scheduled home game in odd-numbered years, so it actually helped Georgia to flip-flop this thing back as well. But from the perspective of a Georgia fan, Auburn's going to have to come to Athens twice in a row to sort of accommodate this because Georgia's already done the 2 years in a row to journey.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It used to be a lot harder for Alabama back when Tennessee was really good, back when I was in school and you had LSU. And it was almost like a sign to the season ticket holders, like, hey, we're going to have Auburn at home this year to make you want to buy tickets, but every other game that means anything is going to be an away game this year.
Right, exactly. All right, let's do item number 4 here. Speaking of scheduling and speaking of potential scheduling controversy on SEC Country Live, maybe an example of Tennessee coach Jeremy Pruitt and Tennessee Athletic Director Philip Fulmer already at a bit of odds over his scheduling philosophy. 24/7 Sports caught up with both these guys at one of these big Orange Caravan speaking events, and well, they seem to have a different idea about non-conference scheduling. Better to do home and home, better to do neutral site games. Here is first Jeremy Pruitt's thought on this, and it seems like Pruitt probably favors the neutral site variety if the neutral site game is being played in what Pruitt views as a hotbed for Tennessee recruiting. Pruitt says the home and home is definitely great, but also if there's a place that you're going to recruit, it's good to play a game there, meaning in that neutral site venue. I think when you're going to play a neutral site game, you got to have that thought in mind. That's Tennessee coach Jeremy Pruitt, as quoted by 24/7 Sports. A little different tone, though, here from Tennessee Athletic Director Philip Fulmer, who said, in most cases, I think our home games need to be played in Knoxville. We got a great place, great setting, so much of our economy centers around it, but I don't think you say never. So it seems like Fulmer favors more of home and home scheduling. It seems like Jeremy Pruitt's a little bit more open to the neutral site stuff, especially if you can get into a place like Nashville, which was sort of the genesis of that question. Is this an example of something we talked about a lot during the winter and the spring, that these two big personalities, different backgrounds, they would be at odds? Are we already seeing an example of that here?
I think they're definitely at odds. I don't think it's an at odds that lends to a fight. I don't think they're going to argue over this issue, but I think it's definitely something they need to work out moving forward because what I see when I look at these comments is Jeremy Pruitt, the new school, coming at Philip Fulmer, the old school, and Philip Fulmer talks about the Knoxville economy, for God's sakes, in the statement. Like, who even thinks of that, in terms of what you're going to do as far as home and home schedules or neutral site games? I don't usually think of Tuscaloosa's economy or Athens' economy when it comes to that. So I think that's an interesting point to look at it for. But I see Jeremy Pruitt, who sees the benefit of going and taking the circus on the road and traveling to Atlanta or traveling to Orlando or Miami, wherever you want to do it, and picking up more recruits along the way, because that's what Jeremy Pruitt's whole program is based around.
I'm actually a little bit surprised, though, that Pruitt's sort of clinging to that as an idea for recruiting when it seems like a lot of the rest of the SEC views the home-and-home non-conference scheduling, because you do get to host recruits in that year in which you have the home game, as sort of the better overall advantage for recruiting. It seems like Alabama's getting away from its neutral site scheduling philosophy, which has been a big part of what Nick Saban has done. Maybe Georgia's getting away from some of that, too, a bit as well with the Notre Dame series, but Jeremy Pruitt's still sort of holding on to that here. I'm going to give both Pruitt and Fulmer a free pass on this just a bit, though, because at some point in time, these two are going to butt heads in a real big way. But this isn't that real way, and this isn't that big way. Every coach and every athletic director disagrees on scheduling. Coaches want to play the easiest possible schedule they can. Coaches want to, have games for recruiting, but for the most part, no coach wants to play any big-time serious game. They only do that because they're forced to. That's just a universal rule for coaching. Right. Athletic directors want to make as much money as they can, which means scheduling more difficult, challenging games here. So from that standpoint, the relationship between Pruitt and Fulmer isn't that different from the relationship with any athletic director and any coach.
Yeah, and I think Teresa Lowry's comments on YouTube, she said, our fans like being at Neyland to recruit on other time. I just don't think that that's what you do this day and age. I really don't. I think there's too many other big games coming on to where if your game is in Neyland Stadium, it's hard to get other opponents to kind of come there unless you're doing home and away.
Yeah.
And your game's going to get surpassed. I mean, look at the opening weekend next year in college football. Alabama, Louisville, LSU, Miami. I mean, the list goes on of those big-name games. Tennessee and West Virginia is one of them. And so you don't want to fall by the wayside where everybody else is kind of on, college football, on ESPN, doing all these things. You don't want to get passed by. I think Jeremy Pruitt understands that.
Well, I think, though, that if you look at the Charlotte game for Tennessee and West Virginia, it's a great game for college football. It'd be great for Tennessee's resume to win the game. But even though Charlotte's a pretty good town for recruiting and probably a pretty good town for Tennessee recruiting in particular, I don't think that Tennessee's recruiting efforts are helped by playing that game. Recruits will get tickets and come to the game. They'll find a way into the stadium, but you really can't host them. You can't really spend any time with them. They're sitting in the stands. They're watching the game, but there's no personal connection there. Recruiting's about relationships, and the relationship is not furthered by you being in a neutral site game where you can't talk to recruits. The relationship is furthered. I mean, the next time you're at your favorite team's home game, watch what's happening on the field before the game. There's a lot of photos being taken. There's a lot of recruits really getting that one-on-one FaceTime with the coaches. That's how recruiting is helped here, and that's what I think Nick Saban wants more of. That's the unspoken part of the Texas series and the Notre Dame series for Alabama. It's Nick Saban getting an opportunity. Half that home and home will be him getting a chance to go face-to-face with the recruits. When Alabama plays Louisville in Orlando, I think this year, Saban can't do that. There are 1 million 4- and 5-star players within an hour's drive of Orlando, but Saban can't talk to any of them when he goes and plays the game in Orlando. That's why I believe Saban wants more games in Tuscaloosa.
I agree with you. And I think that's what makes the Tennessee-West Virginia game a little bit of a head-scratcher. It's not like you're going up to Charlotte where it's like a huge recruiting hub. Now, you have teams go to Dallas, and you have teams go to Houston, you have teams go to Atlanta, obviously being a big one. Orlando, obviously a big recruiting area. So there are some upside to that. There are, to being in a recruit's backyard, there's some upside to that. But you're right, the Charlotte game lacks that a little bit. I think that you had to kind of go there. It's, kind of that crossroads between Tennessee and West Virginia. I don't know that the Tennessee-Virginia Tech game at Bristol a couple years ago really had the impact on recruiting that maybe thought it would. But I agree with you. I mean, home and home is the way to go. I just don't know that. I don't know that that's really what Philip Fulmer's pointing to.
Tanel Allen says, I'm going to be at the game in Orlando. Roll Tide Roll. Tanel, hope you enjoy that. It's a pretty fun place to see a neutral site game. Jason Cook says the SEC has, this is on Facebook, he says the SEC has the weakest non-conference schedules every year. Just look at Alabama's. I am looking at Alabama's. I'm seeing Louisville this year. Alabama will be a big favorite in that game, but only about a 3-point favorite against Florida State before that game kicked off last year. It was USC the year before that. It's been Clemson. It's been Virginia Tech. I think when it comes to the non-conference schedule, especially that week 1 or week 2 deal, I don't think the SEC takes a backseat to anybody. I don't think the SEC's got anything to apologize for.
I don't know that, and this may just be me being a homer, I don't know that you can point to anybody in the last 10 years who has had as strong of a non-conference schedule as Alabama has had. I mean, West Virginia, Michigan, Wisconsin, USC. I mean, they've gone and got it. Now, it is a neutral site, so if that's what your argument is, I understand it. But they are definitely trending away from that. I mean, Nick Saban didn't tell Lamar Jackson to go to the NFL this year. Lamar Jackson could have been a Heisman Trophy winner coming back to face that new secondary.
Jared Seegers in the Facebook comment section says for that Alabama-Louisville game, IMG Academy's team is going to be in Orlando. I bet they probably will be. I bet virtually the entire roster may be there. But if Saban and the position coaches can't talk to them face-to-face, then what good does it really do? I think that's coming from the perspective of the coaches and not just from my perspective. Speaking of recruiting, Let's do item number 5 here now on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list, and a big recruiting weekend for Florida, kind of a barbecue-themed event. And we see a lot of this time of year. Auburn's got Big Cat Weekend coming up. Georgia used to have Dog Night. They sort of changed that philosophy a bit, but a lot of programs have their big showcase, summer recruiting event to generate a lot of attention, a lot of talk. And I'm kind of curious how you think the event for Florida went. First of all, there's the good of this, as one recruit pointed out, huge atmosphere. So you think it's not cool to be a Gator? They got Fortnite, Madden 18 ready to play on 100-inch screens, and a barbecue with hot links, chicken and ribs, not to mention Jeezy's playing over the PA system. This ain't happening in Tallahassee. And if you host an event like this in your Florida, that's exactly what you want to see recruits talking about,
Absolutely.
the sort of spectacle of it all and the engagement of it all. But then there's also, I guess, the other part of this. You may have seen Kadarius Toney get upset on social media because a couple of Florida recruits, not commits, but recruits, Chris Steele and Jaden Davis, 2 4-star defensive backs, with the Florida uniform on, flashing the U sign here, as got picked up on social media. Kadarius Toney, one of the leaders of the current Gators, says, take that uniform off. Y'all don't deserve it. He's pretty upset about that. This led to both Steele and Davis apologizing. Let me show you. Here's Derek Wingo apologizing, saying, I want to apologize to Gator Nation, the coaching staff, for this weekend's incident. It was an immature mistake. It was a moment with a friend, by no means intent to disrespect the Florida Gators. We got another apology here coming in from another recruit as well. This is Jaden Davis, who says, we'd like to apologize to Florida football Dan Mullen for the post. That's a former teammate, didn't intend to disrespect Gator Nation. It was a tasteless mistake. We've got the utmost respect for the Florida Gators in the city of Gainesville. So pretty big-time apologies coming from both Davis and Steele on that, but they were also involved in another incident on campus where defensive backs coach Ron English, I guess they did a pie in the face to English when he was not expecting it. He deleted the videos of the moment were actually deleted from social media, but there's a screen grab that SEC Country captured of English getting the pie in the face here. So a lot to talk about here, a lot of buzz, some of it good, some of it bad. Overall, how do you judge the recruiting weekend here for Florida?
Yeah, I think any buzz is good buzz at this point.
Yeah,
I have
so.
to say, I think that the first tweet really showed, kind of encapsulated what they wanted it to. Fortnite on the screen, a 100-inch screen or whatever it is. You got the blue loungers kind of set out. You got Jeezy on the radio. I think that they wanted to bring that back to Florida. Bring back the coolness that Dan Mullen was used to the first time around with Urban Meyer, where you get all these recruits coming on saying, boy, it's really cool here. And I think that's what they accomplished in a lot of different ways. I thought there's a lot of buzz going on. I think a lot of people got on social media afterwards to talk about what was going on down there with Dan Mullen. And I think it was mission accomplished in a lot of different ways other than that one picture.
Cliff Nelson says the real recruiting comes in hanging on to the commits after these events. And for Florida, it wasn't really so much an event to capture commits as it was to build relationships. I thought that Zach Albaverdi did a good job of writing about that. And Morgan Recton, who is a Florida fan on YouTube, kind of echoing the same thing. From what I heard and read, it went really well and the kids loved it. We just need to produce from it. That's the big if. And I think that's kind of an interesting perspective from Morgan there, who is a Florida fan. I guess the challenge here, though, is, and this is one of the reasons why you see some programs going away from the big grand scale recruiting event, because it's harder to manage. When you have like the big event where you got 1 million recruits on campus, it's a little bit harder to get the face-to-face attention. And all of a sudden, you may have an errant pie in the face or an errant, U sign being flashed up, because the recruits just aren't really chaperoned that closely, right? A lot of programs have kind of gone away from, hey, the big grand scale barbecue to a lot more smaller weekends with a lot more face-to-face and attention. You almost wonder, would something like that have done a better effort for Florida in gaining the attention of some of these recruits?
Yeah, but I just feel like that's the avenue that Florida has to take right now, right? I mean, we've mentioned a couple of times that Dan Mullen kind of needs to get things rolling, right? And they need to get back on track recruiting, and it's kind of been, mixed results as, so far as the head coach down at Florida. And so I feel like something that's different, right? I feel like you have to do something that's different every now and then. I think that you see so many schools that are trying to stand out, and I feel like this is the one thing Florida has done that says, boy, let's stand out. You saw it in the spring game. Let's throw a touchdown pass to this guy. Let's throw a touchdown pass to this guy. Florida's trying to stand out right now, and to that end, I think this was a success.
Marquise Hudson and Kevin Zeminski seem to like what they saw this week in Florida recruiting. Kevin says, great to be a Florida Gator. Marquise kind of echoing the same kind of sentiment here. And I guess to go back to your original statement, I mean, maybe that's the thing for Dan Mullen, that not every piece of news that came out of the Florida weekend was necessarily great, glowing news, but all buzz is good buzz when you're trying to create a bit of a ruckus. And for Pruitt, I should say for Mullen right now, he's got to compete with the ruckus and the energy being shown from Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. Yeah. That's a first-year coach in the SEC who's having, I think, a legitimate impact in the 2019 class. And right now, that's really the guy I think that Mullen's working to keep pace with. And that's why you need weekends like this or weekends all summer where you've got, buzz surrounding these 4- and 5-star prospects, because Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee is holding your feet to the fire right now.
I completely agree. And it's not just, Jeremy Pruitt. I think that also you look at what Kirby Smart's doing, Will Muschamp, you look around the SEC at what's going on. Not only that, but look in the state of Florida. Willie Taggart's had some big wins. Mark Richt's had some big wins down at Miami. You have to kind of keep that going. That's why I don't have a problem with it. I understand things are going to get out of hand. There's going to be a pie slap in the face. A couple of recruits are going to have to use time. But you have to differentiate yourself, especially if you're down in the Gators right now. The Gators should not be one of those teams that are just kind of, lumped in with everybody. And I think Dan Mullen is on the right track so far of trying to distinguish themselves again.
Rostamon Blair says, you follow up the barbecue that Florida just had with Friday Night Lights in July. It can be big, especially after the big running back from ING committees, obviously referencing Florida's efforts at Trey Sanders, whose brother Umstead Sanders is already a preferred walk-on for the Gators, the class of 2019, but Trey Sanders is one of those big prizes that's still out there for the upcoming recruiting cycle. Let's do item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list and turn our attention back to Tua Tagovailoa's big visit to Hawaii. A lot has been going on. As you mentioned before, CBS 42 in Birmingham has been kind of on the scene chronicling all of this as he sort of welcomed back to his home state. I guess the Tagovailoas actually live back in Alabama now, right? They moved. That's where Talia goes to a school now. High school, and they obviously want to be close to Tua, who's playing, and I think presumptively the starter for Alabama. But back in Hawaii and being honored, and some social media images here of exactly what's been going on here. Preparations underway for Tua Tagovailoa's parade in Ua Beach. That's Simona Lee, Eli, who you mentioned before, kind of referencing that. I think there's some other images here. There's Tua signing autographs at a hometown hero celebration, live interview, which we played some audio from a little earlier. Tua even got in kind of the spirit here with a little dancing and sort of his native festivities here, kind of showing that there, looking great, having a good time with the band. But you do have to kind of wonder here, what does Nick Saban think of all of this? This is certainly more attention than he wants any of his players getting, much less a formerly freshman quarterback who got thrust in the spotlight in the national championship game. Saban can't be too happy about anything.
I don't think he has a problem with it. I think, listen, I gave in earlier and I said, listen, he probably did not like what Tua had to say about transferring, but I don't think he has a problem with the guy getting a parade in his hometown.
I've never seen an Alabama player do any of this.
I definitely
Coming
have.
off a freshman
this happens
season,
more than you realize.
Freshman season?
It happens more than you realize. These guys go back to their hometowns and they get, listen, this guy's coming all the way from Hawaii. And Tua, he starts this thing off by saying, and if anybody that watched the actual videos, Tua starts off and says, I did not want this to happen. I didn't want any part of this. But the people that are in charge of his church said, listen, this is about the community. This is about glorifying God's name. And so I don't think Nick Saban's got a problem with that. I think the Tua getting up on stage and dancing, Saban says, listen, that's why you come to places like Alabama to win national titles, to be recognized as a hero. Go back to Hawaii in your off time and be recognized as a hero all you want to. All the guy did was get up on stage and give glory to God. He had a couple of his teammates there, Najee Harris, Alex Leatherwood, a couple of 5-star recruits next to him. I don't think Nick Saban has a problem with it at all.
Jared Seegers in the Facebook comment section says this event was set up to express his faith and to spread the gospel. Maybe that's what the intent was, but there's certainly an image that comes from this that sort of enhances his celebrity status for a coach like Nick Saban, who's sort of done everything he can do to suppress celebrity status in the past. I have a hard time believing that Saban watched all this with a big old smile on his face.
Well, I think it'd be one thing if Tua shows back up, this summer and is like, well, I just come back from this parade, But I think that Tua talked a lot. I think that if you listen to the actual message, Tua talked a lot about how I have to work, how I can't be satisfied with where I'm at, how I have to grind every day. And I think that talking about your faith and things like that, I think it's impossible for Nick Saban to be up in arms. But I really do. I think that being recognized as a hometown hero, yes, Nick Saban does not like the spotlight to be on any one player. But when you're from Hawaii and you're coming all the way to Alabama, I think that Nick Saban thinks it portrays a great image. I think, listen, 5-star quarterback. We got you on the field when it needed to happen. When I promised you national titles, and you got that. Now go home and get your parade. I think that he sees it as a positive. If he was able to come out and talk about it, I think that's what he'd say.
All right, item number 7. Well, he was going to get a chance to talk about it. He's going to be asked
definitely
about
is.
it.
I'm sure
and we'll
he
see
is.
if that answers. It reflects what the description is there. Let's do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. And speaking of quarterbacks in the spotlight for maybe reasons other than their coaches would like, Jake Fromm, the Georgia quarterback, was seen on Instagram here over the course of the last weekend. A little bit of I don't know how serious of an injury this is, but serious enough that he got some treatment for it. He gets a fishing lure stuck in his leg. Now, some of the people who work with us on our show, Hannah and Michael, said that they didn't think that Fromm should have to go to the hospital for this. That was not the kind of thing that he needed to seek any kind of like serious treatment for. I said that infections are potentially a big deal, and you got to watch out for that. You gotten a fishing lure stuck in your leg before?
I've never had one stuck in my leg. I had one stuck in my hand. I've actually had a teammate when I was with the Falcons get one stuck in his hand at a charity event. He had to go to the hospital too. He had to get taken out of right here because the last thing you want to do is tear the skin, tear the muscles, get an infection. So I understand what you're saying. Like he probably might need to be a little bit more hard, more hardcore. But I understand the need to go to the hospital.
But yeah, I mean, like the infections here are a big deal.
Definitely a big deal, especially when you're in a position like he is. Like the last thing you need to do is get off track, and the last thing you need to do is say, "Boy, I can't really participate in 7-on-7s. My leg, my calf is strained right now because of a fishing lure." So I don't have any problem with him in the hospital at all.
Look, this is one of those things where I kind of find myself sort of turning into like an old man and sort of seeing this more from the perspective of the coach and the dad, whereas used to I would see this from the perspective of the player a lot more. It wasn't that long ago where I'd be like, these guys need to have their fun, these guys need to go fishing, go swimming, whatever. Like there was a thing a couple years ago about like, I want to say it may have been Aaron Murray, the Georgia quarterback at the time, who was like jumping off a dock at one of the lakes in Georgia, and it's like probably like a 15-foot drop, whatever.
Right,
I'm like, stop doing this, I find myself wanting to wrap players in bubble wrap a lot more than I used to in terms of, can we not let fishing lures get caught in legs? Can we, Sony Michel, a Georgia running back, had an ATV accident a year or so ago. It's like, can we protect ourselves against that at some point?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, there has to be a fine line, right? There has to be a fine line where you're taking care of yourself and you're also having fun and being a college kid. It's a tough line to walk. Listen, I've seen guys, stumble out of bars and roll their ankle off the side of sidewalks.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
It happens more than you think, and I've seen it happen at a place like Alabama. But it kind of goes back to the whole parade stuff we just talked about. Things are gonna happen, and these guys are gonna celebrate things. These guys are gonna be people, and their hometowns are gonna want to celebrate them. I don't think you can get mad at that. I don't think you can say Jake Fromm is soft. I don't think you can say any of those things. It's regular human nature to do the things these guys are doing.
Tyler Mann says the worst thing that's going to happen to Fromm is that if the Band-Aid they put on his leg sticks to his leg hair when he's running around the field. Hey, listen, I think the issue that comes up here, and what this finally comes down to is when it comes to this time of year, I mean, this is a time in which coaches don't have a lot of control or impact over their players. They're going back to hometowns. They're doing things over the course of the weekend. And there is that sense in which all fans of all schools have to take a bit of a deep breath and just sort of hope that a minor pinprick with this fishing lure is the worst thing that happens to your starting quarterback over the course of the summer. The same thing about grandiose parades back in your hometown. That's like the worst thing that happens here over the course of the offseason. Because for one SEC school somewhere, there's a more negative story coming because this time of year that stuff just can't really be controlled all that much.
Yeah, I got to give credit to Jazz Hatcher too on the Facebook comment section. She says Jake was out there fishing for a new school. That's good stuff right there. That's good stuff right there. But I'm with you. I mean, being in the locker room, doing this thing, going through your teenage years, it's like, it's spring break every year. It's spring break. You get to spring break and you say, boy, we're kind of in the middle of about to step into, spring football. Do I really want to go down to the beach and hang out with my friends? You have to draw a line and you have to have time management. And that's just one of those things a lot of these players are up to.
Matt Tobin on Facebook says Justin Fields has been working out all break, seeing his videos on the gram. He knows it's an uphill battle. I thought this was kind of also a funny opportunity for maybe Fields to put out some sort of video to say, hey, while Jake Fromm's out fishing, getting lures stuck in his leg, I'm out here working. I'm out here kind of putting that in. I think that would be kind of a funny opportunity for Justin Fields to take advantage of that.
I saw Justin Fields' video today, and I can't remember where it came from, but he was throwing 9 routes to receivers at a high school or somewhere, and He looked like he was getting that work in. Now, obviously, he could go fishing afterwards, but it's not like it's not like you have to do one or the other. But I thought it was interesting for that video too.
All right, item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. So we talked earlier about Joe Burrow being added into the mix for LSU. News that I think is really almost by all potential definitions good news for LSU. Whether Burrow gets the job or not, he makes the competition more intense, and he's either as good as he sort of appears to be coming out of Ohio State, or he's a guy that pushes the ultimate quarterback at LSU to be better. I think one way or another, this is good news for LSU. The reaction from LSU fans in our comment section for the last couple of weeks has been a bit more mixed. And speaking of a mixed reaction, you also got that from a couple former LSU stars here. Let me start with Darius Geis on Twitter, who says, "Welcome to the family." I guess that's keeping it 100, I guess, is how you say that. To Joe Burrow, that's Darius Geis saying that. Arden Key, though, the embattled former LSU pass rusher, had a slightly different response, though. Actually, we don't have the Arden Key response, but Arden Key took umbrage to Darius Geis calling it a family. He said it's all a business here. What did Arden Key mean by that?
I think that what he was saying is use this as a business opportunity, use it to come in and deal with business and get the starts you want to and get in there. But I got to say, I thought it was a bad look. I mean, I thought it was a bad look for Arden Key to go on there and say, boy, this is a business, it's not a family. Listen, I think a lot of LSU fans, I don't want to speak for y'all, but I think a lot of LSU fans wish Arden Key would have treated it more like a business back when, you don't take 6 months off from a business, right? You don't go to your job and say, hey, listen, I'll come back in 6 months and I'll be doing, and obviously not performing up to what you were when you left. I think that's a tough pill for a lot of LSU fans to swallow, seeing Arden Key saying, boy, this is not a family down here in Baton Rouge.
Well, I think it speaks to, for him, what was kind of a rough final year. He misses spring practice, he comes back, and he left LSU in his final season with some real, legitimate questions about, what his status was, how good he was. He had, to sort of explain during a lot of these NFL draft interviews about why it was that he wasn't more effective in his final season. You almost wonder, rightly or wrongly, if he put some of the blame on that for LSU. Is this a guy that doesn't have good memories of his time at LSU? Does he have a bad taste towards Orgeron and the program, given the way that it really didn't serve as a great springboard to him for the NFL? There's always been an element of the Arden Key story that's been a bit murky here, going back to really about this time a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago when he misses the spring practice. But you almost wonder, is there sort of a bad taste in Key's mouth, though, over all of this?
Yeah, if that's true, if there is a bad case in his mouth, and that's the reason he's kind of speaking out against this thing, then he needs a dose of reality. I mean, he needs an absolute reality check. I don't think Ed Orgeron treated him with anything but kid gloves throughout the entire process. I mean, he goes out and says, Arden Key's out, he's on personal issues, he's got this to do, never spoke about what he was out against. Always, kind of made it sound really good when he updated what his weight was. Boy, he's up, he's feeling good. Turns out he lost a step. I mean, he wasn't the same Arden Key when he got back. So I think they really treated him with kid gloves. And I think if Arden Key was expecting anything more than that, then he needs a dose of reality.
On YouTube, Cliff Nelson says there's a fine line between breeding competition and alienating quarterbacks and causing dissension. Is that where you think Key's potentially coming from here? Is this sort of a subtweeting way of him siding with the quarterbacks on the roster and feeling like that Burrow coming in?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously this is a lot of speculation here, but that is an act of betrayal on the part of the guys that were there. Is this Arden Key sort of casting his hat into the ring of one of these quarterbacks that's already on the roster here?
I think that's definitely an angle, and Tyler Mann kind of backs up what you're saying. He says he means you're not just going to walk in here and be the starter. You got to earn it. I can see that definitely being what he's talking about. I can see him definitely having the back of one of the guys that were already on the roster, be that Justin McMillan or somebody else in the LSU waiting arms of being a starting quarterback. I just don't know that saying it's a business was the right way to kind of look at it. Maybe he was not a fan of Joe Burrow stepping in, so he's kind of trying to find some way to say that. But I don't know that the way he put it was the right way.
But let me just be really blunt about this for a moment. For the LSU fans who say, hey, this is not doing right by the quarterbacks already on the roster. Listen, you yourself have come on this show a million times and talked about the fact that you think that Orgeron's a pretty precarious position as a guy that could maybe even be out of a job after the 2018 season if things go badly enough. I think Orgeron's going to have a little bit more rope than that. But you've said that you think Orgeron himself is on a bit of a slippery slope.
No doubt.
If you're coaching for your job, you don't have time to be loyal to anybody. You've got to put a roster together
100%.
that can win enough in 2018 to give you a chance to recruit for 2019. And that's why you bring in Giles, the Texas Tech wide receiver, and Fehoko, the Texas Tech defensive lineman, and Alexander, the Stanford defensive back. You're trying to still be here in 2019, which means you've got to have the quarterback. And Orgeron, it sounds like, gave all three of these guys, McMillan and Narcisse and Brennan, he gave all three of these guys a real significant look during the spring, and they didn't do anything with it. I mean, I'm not in Baton Rouge every day, and I don't have a rooting interest in this, so maybe I'm too disconnected to really have that strong of an opinion. But I don't think Orgeron owes these three quarterbacks anything more than he's already given them. He gave them their chance. He put them on display, gave them all 3 reps, and they didn't take advantage of it. He's got to now go find a quarterback that's going to keep him from getting fired.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And Cliff Nelson chimes in and says, I can respect that point, BA. And I've been on that bandwagon for a while because, listen, LSU fans will back me up in the comment section. The over-under on your season is 6.5 wins at this point. You can't tell me that Orgeron gets to 7 wins right now with really a lot of this talent. I mean, he's got 5 starters that are transfers. If that recruiting class isn't where it needs to be with a loaded state of Louisiana this year, if he's not, top 10, knocking on the door of being a top 5 recruiting class, and he's only getting 7 wins, then that's a slippery slope, and you got to deal with it sooner than you would have liked to if you're LSU's administration.
Esteban Estevez says Coach O's doing his thing. He's still coming back on top after every step back, and along the line with Esteban's comment from Facebook there, I guess I am a little bit more surprised that more LSU fans didn't treat this as I said earlier in our program, a sign of LSU's ability to win with a quarterback that other programs wanted. North Carolina for sure, Cincinnati, who you say, well, LSU should beat out Cincinnati. But the fact of the matter is, the Haskin kid that's going to win the quarterback job at Ohio State is a really good quarterback. Tate Martell, the other backup there, is also a pretty elite prospect. So not being named the starter at Ohio State is not necessarily that big of a knock on Joe Burrow here. This, to me, represents a bigger quarterback recruiting win that LSU's had, I mean, in how many years? Maybe. So for me, this is something that if I was an LSU fan, it'd give me confidence in Orgeron and Ensminger, the offensive coordinator, that LSU could sort of get its pitch together here and win a recruiting battle for a quarterback that a lot of other programs wanted.
Yeah, I mean, Danny Etling comes in from Purdue, right? Danny Etling comes in from Purdue, and I honestly don't think the guy got enough credit for the things that he did do at LSU. I think a lot of people focus on what he didn't do at LSU, and I think that's a shame. But one man's trash is another man's treasure. And I think that getting this kid out of Ohio State and head down at LSU, I mean, this really could, in my opinion, this could be a job saver for Orgeron. Because so you look at that number 6.5 that we covered last week, and you wonder, what does Joe Burrow add to that? Does having a quality quarterback that's an upperclassman that can learn your system, what does that add to it? Does that get you to 8, 9, and 10 wins? And I think that possibility still lies out there for him.
Jared Seegers, who's an Alabama fan, says LSU's where quarterbacks go to die. And I know that's been the reputation of LSU, but this program has changed over a lot since then. It's a brand new offensive coordinator. Now, Matt Canada was supposed to be the OC that changed that reputation. That didn't work out. The relationship between he and Orgeron wasn't strong. And as you pointed out, that's not the only coach that Canada's butted heads with over the years, apparently. But, this notion of, well, LSU's a program where quarterbacks can't really stand, can't really thrive. The coaching staffs under which that was true, they've all been kind of pushed out. I mean, this is what Ed Orgeron's dealing with here now. An opportunity here in 2018 to change that narrative.
Yeah, and Alexander Rain, I disagree with this comment. He says, I doubt Coach O promised him anything more than an opportunity. And I just got to tell you, I completely disagree with that. This is a kid who was looking at schools in his backyard. He's looking at schools where his dad coaches. He's looking at a place like Cincinnati where he knows Luke Fickell. He's looking at a place like UNC who's got a great graduate program. You're headed down to LSU because you want to play big boy football and because that's where you believe you have the best chance. I mean, he could have gone anywhere. His dad played at Nebraska. He could have gone to Nebraska if he thought that all he needed was an opportunity.
Yeah.
He's going down to LSU because Ed Orgeron has told him, hey, kid, we need you to come down to Baton Rouge.
Make you nervous, no pun intended, that he was reportedly nervous about Baton Rouge. That was the report out there last week. Does that make you nervous at all?
I don't think we could read much into it. I mean, it's one word and it's hearsay and it's coming from an article written about him. I don't know. Maybe he says, I'd be nervous to step in front of this many people, and you'd be right to be. I mean, there's a lot of pressure that's going to be on the LSU starting quarterback. So if that's why he's nervous, I don't have a problem with it at all. And I think playing at a place like Ohio State has probably prepared him pretty well for what he'll face down in LSU.
By the way, on our Facebook comment section, Michael Cooper mentioned it's a great job to you earlier on Roll Tide Daily earlier today. How much fun what was it to kind of get that first show under your belt there today?
It was a good time, and I kind of unleashed a lot of Bammer. I had a lot of crimson blood flowing through the veins, and I got to unleash the inner Bammer in me. So anybody who really is looking for that side of me, I'd definitely check that show out.
And by the way, it's one of the things that we love doing here in SEC Country. You get this for a lot of the schools in the months and years ahead, and hopefully a lot more of those, where we talk about SEC Country Live here talk about all the SEC here as a part of SEC Country Live, but for the individual schools, like I'm blessed to get to do for Dog Nation Daily, the Georgia Bulldogs. Mike's doing for Alabama Crimson Tide right now. Some of our other shows kind of doing the same thing. We love being able to drill down specifically on the one school to give all of you an outlet to talk about the school that you like the most. And then obviously we'll come together here in the afternoons and try to keep from strangling each other as part of SEC Country Live.
It was nice. I had to reel it back in a little bit because I went off on a tangent about Tua Tagovailoa and big media, and I talked about Danny Cannell just a little bit.
Yeah.
But I had to reel it back in and feeling good.
Real quickly before we move on here, I want to talk about South Carolina. But what was the Alabama fan reaction? We've heard some of that here today, a lot of it being upset with me. But what was the Alabama fan reaction this afternoon on Roll Tide Daily about this, for me, it's moving from being a competition towards being more of a controversy. What was the Alabama fan reaction?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were actually slanted even more into his direction than even I was. Now, I was upset about it because, I think that it's something that was taken out of context, and that's not the right word because that's the word he used. But I think that he was just speaking in the moment. I think that's what Tua was doing, was speaking in the moment. Man's like, this is a non-story. This is an absolute non-story. I don't even know why we're talking about this. I understand why it's a story, but I do think it was made to be a bigger deal than it needed to be.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. We'll watch how that plays out in the weeks ahead here, because I think there's a lot more coming on this, and we'll see where it all goes. For now, though, let's do out of number 9 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And speaking of stories, maybe a bit of a negative story here for South Carolina. At odds a bit over a recruit coming out of Stevenson High School, and Corey Johnson is the recruiting coordinator for Stevenson. And if you're not aware, Stevenson is a powerhouse program for years in the Atlanta area that produced a lot of elite recruits. And apparently there was some misunderstanding between a current recruit and South Carolina. The State, the big newspaper there in Columbia, had gotten a couple tweets here from Corey Johnson that have since been deleted about the relationship between this powerhouse high school and South Carolina. Here is Corey Johnson's first tweet as captured by the Estate, since deleted. Stevenson linebacker Trey Wilkins is reopening his recruiting, and South Carolina is no longer welcome at Stevenson High School. This is what Corey Johnson says via Twitter. He then deleted the tweet. A lot of this goes back to that same story that we hear over and over again, and we have been hearing this now for a couple of years, that the offer was extended, but it wasn't a committable offer, apparently, at least according to the online scuttlebutt from the State and other sources, that they wanted to see him camp, they wanted to see him compete at camps. This is sort of started by Nick Saban, kind of continued by a lot of the Saban disciples around the SEC. And for Stevenson, this was a pretty ugly misunderstanding here. What do you kind of come in on this?
Yeah, I didn't. First of all, it stinks to me. And you can answer this question better for me because I haven't followed recruiting quite as long as you have. Is this a recent deal where this comes up a lot? I feel like the committable thing is so recent. You know what I mean? Like, you got an offer to go, you say, hey, I want to go, and then you commit, and then you go through your recruiting process with that. I feel like this committable thing is something kind of the Johnny-come-lately kind of deal, where all of a sudden you show up and, boy, I really like you. I don't want to be the last school to offer you, but I haven't seen you in person, so I don't know if I want you yet. And so I can't help but think this was an ugly look for Stevenson High School. Listen, you want the best for your players. You want the best situation possible. And for some of those guys, it's going to be South Carolina, whether or not you like it.
Okay, so my feelings on this are complicated. The one thing I do disagree with was what you just said. This is an ugly look for Stevenson High School. Okay. Now, Jared Seeger sort of agrees with you. He says, so the high school coach has the authority to limit his players' ability to sign with a college. Dumb. Well, Corey Johnson does apparently backtrack on some of this whole idea. Once again, the State captures a tweet that was also deleted from Corey Johnson, the recruiting coordinator at Stevenson, who says, I've been advised that Stevenson is a public school in South Carolina. He's always welcome to come visit. Corey Johnson seems to love exclamation marks. He gives you 3 right there. Here's my defense of Stevenson, which is the school in question here. Somebody's going to serve as an advocate for the recruits themselves. And the coaches pretend to be your advocate, but they're advocating for their own jobs. They're advocating for their program here. Someone's got to really step in and separate fact from fiction for the players. That's a hard job. It'd be great when parents do that, but sometimes parents are only going through this for the first time. They need the help of a school like Stevenson, which has had 1 million recruits over the course of years. So I'm not going to bash Stevenson too much for this. I guess my larger overall point is that the definition of words can change over time.
Right.
And in recruiting, there's a lot of examples of how those words have changed a lot here recently. The definition of an offer does not mean the same thing it used to. word definitions change. They just evolve over time. The definition of the word offer has evolved. The same way the definition of the word commitment has evolved here as well. Committed used to mean committed.
Right.
The same way a marriage is committed. Now committed means this is the school that I've sort of named for now, but I'm thinking about changing that as of later on. It's a fluid situation. Word meanings change. And I think that for the people who follow recruiting closely, they understand that. For the sort of outside media, I think sometimes this can be confusing.
Yeah, I agree to that extent, and it stinks to me, in my opinion, that really the definition of the word has changed. But I think that if you're that recruiting coordinator, then you look at that recruit and say, boy, they didn't treat you very well, right? Let's maybe move on past South Carolina. I don't like how they dealt with you. Let's look in another direction. That's not to say that somebody else that comes from Stevenson would not be a good fit at South Carolina. Maybe their offers are South Carolina and Marshall and southeastern Louisiana. Are you going to say that kid can't go to South Carolina? Absolutely not. And so to that point, I just think that you're kind of overstepping your boundaries.
Yeah, I think there were hurt feelings. Cooler heads are probably going to prevail here on both South Carolina side and the side of the elite high school there in Atlanta. Sad news here for item number 10 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And we had a string of sad news coming from the SEC as of late. It was Commissioner Mike Slive, which we talked about. The former Ole Miss legend Billy Brewer passed away. Georgia lost a great former quarterback, Andy Johnson, recently from the early 70s. And now one of the greatest players in SEC history, Billy Cannon, a legend for LSU, a guy that I'm too young to have seen play. Mike, I know you are as well, but as a student of SEC history, and I certainly am, Cannon is a name that you have to put on the very, very short list of all-time LSU greats. Here's what LSU said about Cannon's passing, that he passed away peacefully in his home early Sunday morning. He was 80 years old. The entire LSU family mourns with the Cannons and his loved ones. He will never be forgotten, and we at SEC Country obviously join in on that. The great punt return in the game against Ole Miss is the thing that you always remember here. But for LSU fans, I mean, he's their guy. You know, we said this before the other day that every school has a name that is more famous to them than it is to everybody else outside the SEC. Cannon's an example of the opposite. For people of my age and older, he's the one name from the school that everybody knows. Transcends just individual fans. So it's a hugely sad day for the LSU family and for the Cannon family there.
Yeah, I think what's great about SEC Country Live is that, it does kind of have that community feel as far as SEC goes. And when I heard the news of Cannon passing away, I immediately thought of all the LSU fans in the comment section and the LSU community as a whole. And obviously, thoughts go out to them.
Go on YouTube if you've never seen him play. His highlights really do kind of hold up pretty well. It's obviously a very different era than the one we're watching right now, but he has some pretty dazzling highlights in an LSU uniform, and so it'll be fun to kind of catch up on if you've never seen him before. And no easy way to transition from that to a lighter subject, but here on SEC Country Live, we always looking to kind of close the show on kind of a light-hearted way, and we'll make today no different than that. You may have seen over the weekend the Preakness Stakes there in Maryland, the second leg of the Triple Crown, and weather a little bit of a factor there in Maryland where the race kind of goes down at Pimlico. The folks in the infield, though, who are known for big-time partying, big-time tailgating, a lot of revelry, they didn't let a little mud stop them, including this one party-goer in particular, already cloaked in mud, getting a little dirtier here, just rolling and wallowing in it. Got the nice, derby-style hat on there. What does a guy do after you get this muddy?
That was my big question. How does this guy make it home? Like, do you hop in the back of a pickup truck and go through a car wash? Like, I don't know if there's a good. I think you just got to get naked and literally. I don't know where you go from there, man.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is one of those things that maybe he's just wired differently than me. But I got to think you immediately regret this decision 5 seconds after you commit to it. Now, he's famous. He's on NBC, and he's on SEC Country Live right now. He's got what appears to be a canteen strapped to his body. He really looks like he's invading Iwo Jima here, and he's partying in the infield for the Preakness Stakes here.
Yeah, he's definitely got some liquid courage running through those veins of his. And so, listen, I understand it. I think we've all been there. You want to party and do crazy things, but boy, I would not have liked to have been in those shoes.
All right, really good stuff today. Check out the podcast. It'll be available for you wherever you find podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Android devices, the world famous SoundCloud, everything else kind of in between there. You can check that out. And let your friends on video, whether it be Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, let them know we're talking about the SEC here each and every afternoon. We'll see you back here again tomorrow one more time for another episode of SEC Country Live coming your way at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And between now and then, everybody have a great day.